righty. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Banquet Hall Podcast, the podcast where we tell tomorrow's stories today. My name is Kyler. I am your host, as usual. Listeners, if this is your first time tuning in, make sure you follow Banquet Hall Podcast on social media at Banquet Hall Pod. And brand new that I get to say on the podcast for the first time. So, Tianna, you're kind of like my test subject. Not test subject, like, it sounds kind of weird, but you get to hear this for the first time. But thefourthkyler.com is officially a purchased domain. The Banquet Hall Podcast has its own page on there, so y'all can head over to thefourthkyler.com/BHP to learn a little bit more about the podcast. But I'm joined by one of my great friends, the one, the only Tianna. Tianna, how are you doing today?
I am doing pretty good. I had a nap somewhere in the day, so that's really the highlight. So any day I get a nap is a good day, I guess.
Any day you get a nap is a good day. And I'm going to challenge myself to make this podcast the highlight of your day. That is my goal for the next whatever amount of time we're talking. Hopefully not like 6 hours of time. Like, I don't want to take up that much of your time. That would be a little awkward, but you're gonna need a long nap. I think you might have to call that one sleep.
Yeah, listen, a long one. I mean, they're all naps to me. I feel like when you wake up and you have things to do, it was only a nap.
Hey, I love it. I'm with it. Shout out to naps. We were just talking about naps earlier today because I was reminding people that naps are a form of resistance sometimes, and we got to rest our bodies, our minds, our souls. We was talking right before we recorded, like, it's always just a lot of shit going on in America and the world. So if you got to take a few naps in a day, like, we deserve that. Absolutely. But Tianna, the first question I always start my podcast with, or at least 99.9% of the time, I think it's very important for our listeners to understand where people are from and some of their upbringing, just to paint the picture of like who we're talking with and what has shaped who they've become. So Tianna, where are you from and how did that shape who you have become / who you are becoming?
Absolutely. This is a great question. This has always been a tricky question for me. So I am originally from Anchorage, Alaska. I was born there. My mother was born there. All my family is still there. Excuse me. I lived there until I was 9, and then I moved to Las Vegas. And so those two cities have had a huge impact on me. In ways that I think I'm still learning. As a small child, I was, outside. I was a nature girl. I was, making the mud pies. I was playing kitchen in the front yard where you just like pull grass and flowers and smash it up and pretend like you're cooking and, climbing trees and, almost getting lost in rivers, down by our house, like kind of some really dangerous stuff. Actually, when I think back to it, I'm like, girl, what were you doing? And then I had like really unique experiences, right? Like I used to live in this apartment complex, and they would like plow the snow, and the snow doesn't melt because it's below freezing or whatever. It's really fucking cold, so it's not melting. And like they would plow the snow, and then snow would like pile on top of that mound of snow. And so like in the winter in this apartment complex, there would be this like huge, what to me as a tiny like little 4-year-old child was a mountain. Okay. And all the like neighborhood kids would like climb up it, right? And then there was like, they kind of like made a slide. And so we would climb up it and then slide down. Now, I had a lot of trouble getting up there for the first time. And my older sister actually had to like help me. And like the kids, they're like, come on, you can do it. And I get up to the top and I immediately slide down. And my sister was so mad. But I was like, I just wanted to do the slide, And so it was like experiences like that where I was like, just outside, just really in the dirt, in the nature, in the air, all of the things. I grew up seeing moose on my way to school or like on the playground during recess. The they call them, the noon duties or whatever. Whoever was like watching us during recess would like call us in. They're like, there's a moose on the campus or whatever. Anyways, and I grew up, you know, with a bunch of cousins, my little brother, grandparents, like so many people in my family. And then I moved to Las Vegas, and it was me, my mom, my older sister, and it was hot.
I bet.
And
I mean, when you move out of Alaska, isn't everywhere almost hot?
you know, yeah, yes, actually. Yes, it's actually pretty warm down here in the lower 48. Um, but it was scorching. It was scorching and dry, and just like I was so, my body was like not used to it. And I think that I am, you know, like kind of like uncovering some of my like what is the word I'm reaching for? Like some of my disabilities, I think like became more noticeable when I moved to Las Vegas, right? Like I have eczema. You really do not thrive in a dry, hot environment when you have eczema, right? So like my relationship to my body like immediately changed. My relationship to people immediately changed because I was no longer around my family. I didn't really have friends. And then we moved a lot when I was in Vegas. We moved well over 14 times in
Oh
like
wow.
10 years. I feel like it was more than that. And I mean, even in Alaska, I moved a lot, but it was still always the same to me because it was like, I could still go to my grandma's house. I could still go to my cousin's house. I could still, you know, whereas like when you move in a city where you don't know anybody, it's just, you're really starting from scratch each time. So I became very lonely very quickly. And yeah, it was a really hard time in my life. And I knew like, I was like, as soon as I can get out of here, I'm getting out of here. I felt like everything that I wanted to do, every like dream that I had was not attainable in Las Vegas. And I think a lot of that was just because I didn't have a family or community.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was a single mom and she had to work 2 jobs, or she had to work graveyard. And then, you know, my little sister was born eventually. And I was basically helping raise my little sister. And so even when I was in high school and I was like, I want to go branch out and do sports and do this and do that, it was like I had to take care of my sister. And so which would have been different if we were in Alaska, right? There would have been somebody else to watch her. There would have been somebody else to take care of her, not like kids taking care of kids, right? And so those two, yeah, those experiences have had like a huge impact on me. And like, I think at 28 now, I'm like growing a new connection to land and being outside, and I'm understanding my disabilities in a new way, and I'm understanding like an importance to like being around people and building really strong relationships, and you know, thinking about like chosen family and close friends and stuff like that. Because even when I was in Alaska, like, yeah, I was with my family all the time, but I was also with my mom's best friends a lot, you know, and these were my aunties. And so I'm thinking about that too, and like how people were taking care of my mom and taking care of me when, you know, we were both very young. And so, yeah, I think those are some of the ways, I would say those are the major ways that the schools have, you know, impacted me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing to that depth too, because I think that that's why I asked this question, because there's just so much that can come out of like where you grew up, where you've moved to. And I think especially like when you're in college or growing up, so often it's just, oh, where are you from? And you just say it. And then it's just like, oh, okay. But not really going deeper into like, what does that mean to be there? Because like you so beautifully illustrated, like moving from Alaska to Las Vegas, like in my eyes, those are two extremes, obviously, as someone who's never been to Alaska. but it's like
Right.
a lot of what you just said, like, yeah, you were saying like, and I was nodding, but I'm like, no, I don't know what it's like to have a moose on your playground. Because it's just like, in my head, I'm like, yeah, there might be a stray dog on the playground in Gardena, but just a moose, like I just don't know what I would do with that. Um, One thing that I heard you say though is like there's this love for nature in your life, and it's something we're going to get into a little bit later. But obviously, Las Vegas has not. Las Vegas barely got like nature in some instances, depending on where you're at in Vegas. But like when you're coming for somewhere that has like such a naturey feel to it, and there's nature all around you, what was that like? If you remember, like just going to Las Vegas and not seeing as many trees around, assuming you weren't in like parts of Nevada that had like more trees.
Yeah. Yeah. It was weird. It was weird. It was weird. And it was also like especially weird because so my older sister's dad was in the military. And so when I moved there, we had stayed with them for a little bit and we were staying on the military base. And so it was like I don't know what your relationship is to like military bases if you've been there, but like they're like little cities inside, you know, like a lot of people don't always leave the base because they have everything that they need right
Yeah.
there. And so it was strange because like as a kid, I'm in Las Vegas and I'm not like really leaving this very specific. I moved when I was going into the fourth grade. I had no business running around the streets of Las Vegas. You know, I had no business at all. So it was just I was just like living on the housing part of it, and then taking the bus to school to like the main part, which is like it's not called Manch Manor at the time, but it was called Manch Manor, which is the housing part, and then Nellis, like the main part of Nellis Air Force Base is where like the schools were and stuff like that. And so it was strange because like everybody's yards had rocks and like dry grass and you know all the trees like you know in the neighborhoods a lot of the trees are you know they're not just growing you know those were planted and stuff like that. And so it was like such a stark contrast, but to be honest I don't think it was like as like conscious in my mind because of the heat, you don't spend time outside.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't remember playing outside. Like when I was on base, we had a youth center, which would be the equivalent to like Hawaii or like a boys and girls club or whatever. You know, after school, everybody goes there and does, you know, we got a basketball court, we got a dance machine, which is where I spent a lot of my fourth grade year actually. And so there was no like playing outside. And even when I got into like middle school and high school, we would play or like we would go outside, but like we would hang out under an awning at a park, you know? And that was very strange to me. And I think it also challenges me to understand nature in a fuller extent of like nature isn't just trees and you know it's not just like plush grass and like these beautiful scenes that you know pop up on like you know when your computer screen times out and like all those like little beautiful pictures come up, you know. It's not just that. I mean the nature of the desert is wild. It's so wild. You know, my introduction to scorpions, my introduction to deadly spiders, you know, seeing a black widow for the first time was a terrifying experience. Seeing a brown recluse, you know, and thinking of these things as like a child. I mean, I see a brown recluse now and it's bags are packed, I gotta go. But
right, time to move out.
As a child, like that was so like that really blew my mind because I'm like, well, if it bites me, then there goes my leg, you know? Like I'm literally like, I'm like, how are people living here? You know, this is my introduction to roaches. because like the thing about Alaska is we have animals, we don't really have bugs. We have like flies, mosquitoes, but like things don't really thrive there like that. But things thrive in the heat. And one of those things or one of those groups is roaches. And so it was like I'm seeing like nature in a whole different way. I remember I was in AP Calculus my senior year. Please don't ask me why I was in that class. I shouldn't have been there. But we had calculus camp. And so
you went to calculus camp?
Please. Please.
You said don't ask why you was in AP Calc. You didn't say don't ask why you was at calculus camp.
So it's basically a field trip where we go camping as a class for a weekend, and we do practice AP Calc tests, but then we're just like camping. And so it was like, okay, cool, I want to go camping. And we went camping and we're in these like in the beautiful red rocks, you know? And I think I was like, again, not consciously then, because what 18-year-old Tianna didn't care about. I'm like, I just want to hang out with my friends and make s'mores, you know? But I'm like reflecting back and I'm like, you know, these beautiful rocks and like the hiking we did and, you know, all of that. And it's just like thinking about how the desert still holds so much life. And still like things still grow in the desert, you know, plants still grow in the desert, animals still grow in the desert, bugs grow in the desert. Okay. They are there. And it's just like, I think when I reflect on my time in Vegas, it really forces me to think about nature in a more like all-encompassing way. Now, it's not the nature I like and prefer. I do love a good tree, and I do have like a tree obsession. And I think for me, the nature and the connection to land that I want to have and the way that I want to like tend to land is not in the desert, because it doesn't serve me. But there are plenty of people that I know that are like, I love the desert and this is where I belong. And, you know, kudos to them. Let's be in our respective places.
Yeah, I'm definitely not one of those people. I need to stay as far away from, especially Vegas heat desert. Nah, because when it's July and it's just 117 for no reason, and you just die when you step foot outside, like I'm cool.
Yeah, yeah. Like 110 being a normal temperature outside still really blows my mind. It still feels ungodly. And I don't ever want to be a part of that.
No, unsubscribe.
Listen, the 93 that be out here in LA is
terrible.
Enough. Is enough.
Yeah, right before we started recording, we were just talking about how it's like in the 80s and we both got our fans on. Like I'm the heat's definitely not for me, but yeah, I just appreciate just how intentionally you talk about how you've experienced things and how you reflect back on things you've experienced. One of the reasons why whenever I have a friend who's a poet, I always look forward to talking to y'all, because it's like you ain't just gonna get like, oh yeah, some trees outside. It's like, nah, like let me describe in granular detail like the specific shade of green of the trees and which direction the wind was blowing, like what was on the ground. Like I just love how we talk about things as artists, as poets, because sometimes I talk to somebody and I ask them to describe something, they describe it on such like level 0.5. I'm like, come on, let's get to the depth. Like that tree wasn't just green. Like what color was it really?
Right. And also like, you know, this question is like, what poet hasn't written about or pondered for years and years about where they grew up and about nature? You know, like, come on now, this like poetry 101 is like right about your relationship to home.
Yeah, that's definitely a layup. I was looking back. I was at an open mic and I was looking back at old poems to see what I wanted to perform, because I wanted to perform something old. And I came across a poem that I wrote when I graduated from UCSD and was preparing to like start working full time for UCSD, and it was a goodbye letter to Los Angeles. I was like, come on, Kyler, like really, you wrote a goodbye letter to LA? Then I read it, I was like, dang, like I really gave intentional thought to what does it mean to leave this place that I thought I was just going to come back to after 4 years going to UCSD and then come back. And I'm like, yeah, like this is a poem. Like that's just how it is. But we're going to get to the poetry in just a bit. Want to make sure we give our listeners the fun stories. So wanted to put you on the spot and ask you, do you remember how we crossed paths? I'm curious what story comes to mind when you think about when we crossed paths.
Okay. If I remember correctly, it would have been the ABC conference, Irvine, and I think we met in the hallway of the host hotel.
Yep.
And were we playing some game?
Yep.
I don't remember the game. But I remember that. I do remember that. That's how we crossed paths. And then we met again. It wasn't, did we meet before this again, before the Student of Color Conference?
No, I think the Students of Color Conference was the second time I ever saw you.
Okay, gotcha. So yeah, so ABC, which was a hilarious time. The Student Color Conference, which was a ridiculous time. I don't remember what was happening at that conference. And I think that's like because my mind is like just delete whatever was going on, because it was a wild time. And then, you know, our very good friend Lisa, funny enough, knew both of us. And so continued to hang out with both of us at the same time. And we're like, oh, you're great. Let's be friends. So now we're here.
Now we are here. Good job remembering. Sometimes I ask people when they don't remember the same thing I remember. So definitely on the same page. ABC conference at Hotel Irvine. It was like some UCSD people. We were just bored in the hotel, and Andre had this book of questions that we got from like Urban Outfitters, and it was just like four of us just sitting in the hallway asking each other these random questions. And then you and some other people, I think from Santa Cruz, came by and were like, "Hey, can we join y'all?" We're like, "Yeah." And then that's how we became friends. But who would have thought that would last outside of that hallway? And we did. We made it happen.
We did. And you know what? Congrats to us. There's actually a lot of people from like college that I just don't talk to or like am not in active friendship. So I'm like really glad that we were able to stay strong.
Definitely agree. I do want to give a little bit more detail to the meeting at Students of Color Conference, though, just to see like if you remember this. And apologies if this brings up like dark times in University of California existence, but the reason that we interacted, I was hanging out with Lisa, and then I think it was either before or after the like Black Caucus, and you came and was talking about how somebody didn't think you were Black.
I do remember that.
And I just remember, I think this is me like just meeting you again for the second time. You're like, yeah, you're Black. Like I didn't, like listeners, if y'all are watching the video, like she's obviously Black. And like Black, if y'all really know Tito, she Black as hell. So that anyone will have the audacity to like question something like that, I was like, this conference, like you said, is going to be ridiculous.
Yeah, the conference was really weird. I remember like there were a lot of things, right? And like, yeah, I remember having that conversation and can also like acknowledge that like I'm a very light-skinned person and like read as ambiguous to some people. And so like I think at that time, like still grappling with that, but also remembering the way that the person approached me was like, what is happening here? Like this is not even like, felt like they were really trying to be vindictive. But then also that conference was like, I remember being in spaces where people were just making a lot of space for whiteness and being like, we need white allyship and we need to not offend white people and we need to not be racist to white people. And I'm like, what? is happening? What's going on? What are we, what, it just felt like it was weird. And I never went to that conference again.
Yeah, that was a wrap on that. And I know exactly who you're talking about who made those statements because she was part of our delegation.
Yeah, yeah. But I think like, I mean, yes. And also I'm like, it was more than one person. And it just
Somebody did a color blindness poem during the lunch. Like a black person gave like a poem about being colorblind. They were like, oh, like, I don't care if you brown, black, white, or purple, like I don't see race. And we're like, dang, like at the Students of Color conference.
yeah, weird, very, very strange place, especially when like I think so many of us, because that was what our sophomore year of college.
Mm-hmm.
I think so many of us were coming, like really coming into our like political identities,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or like maybe not even coming into the identities, but like gathering language for um these identities in our positions and our positionality in the world, and like also like uncovering like wild truths about anti-blackness and about history and about the UC system and all of these things. It was just such a like really strange conference to be at.
Yeah.
Oh, the I really want to remember her name. She was I know she was like a Latinx like activist, and she was a speaker. And
Mm-hmm.
she gets to one point in her talk and she was like, and you know, we all started in Africa, so we're all
Oh
African.
yeah, I remember
You
that.
remember that?
I remember that. What a conference. What a conference.
Oh my gosh. I think that lady has a park named after her or something. I'm gonna have
Uh,
to remember who it was because that really blew my mind.
I'm petitioning for us to get parks named after us then as like just bare minimum life accomplishments because I think we've done enough for a park.
Listen. I mean, we're all African, so we should all, you know, be named after a park. I just feel like that was the qualification that she was telling us. Oh, bizarre.
Bizarre at its finest. But I am thankful for those ridiculous college spaces because it brought me so close to like people like you, like meeting different people and being able to engage with people. Because I think some of the most important like connections I made in college were just when I was with a random assortment of black people and we all give each other like that look like this is weird, right? And then the people are like, yeah, this is weird. I'm like, okay, cool, we're friends because you think this is some weird shit too.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but like we said, brought us all here today. We met there. We got to connect randomly over the summers in Santa Cruz. I used to have to fly up to Oakland when you were living up there to work, and we would get dinner because I really felt what you said about like going to a new place, like needing community and friends to be around. Because I was in hotel rooms in Oakland for like 3 straight weeks, and I'm like, dang, I really don't know that many people up here. And then we would
Yeah.
just like grab dinner like Solely Vegan or somewhere in Oakland and just chop it up. And I'm like, dang, like I feel like that's when our friendship really got very strong roots because it's like,
Yeah.
okay, we're hanging out outside of Lisa, like we're just talking about life and really connecting. So definitely value our friendship holistically, but definitely value that period of time in our friendship. And of course, just all the times we got to talk poetry and just like go to open mics. I think I got to see you perform in Oakland once. And so I want to make sure that we transition to talk about you as an artist, as a creative. And the way I like to start these types of conversations, just letting you have the opportunity to find yourself. So, who are you as an artist or as a creator? Because I think everyone has their own definition for what that means for themselves.
That's the question, isn't it? That's the question. It reminds me of the question, what do they say? What is the job or the purpose of the poet? I feel like people ask that a lot, especially like I'm getting my MFA now, so I'm talking to a lot of poets and it comes up a lot. And I think that's really wrapped into, you know, when people think about that question individually, I think that's really wrapped into like who we are as poets. And I am just going to say, I don't know.
That's so fair.
I'm just gonna say, you know, I think that, you know, this last, I mean, you know, since the pandemic, who has not been in transition? Who has not been fighting for their life every single day, you know? And then even before that. But this last year and a half, I would say, has been kind of like just like an uprooting of my entire life. And like, it's been so transitional. And I think I am trying to figure out who I am as an artist. What am I trying to create? Why am I trying to create those things? I think, not that I think, I came into poetry as a very young person. I was around 12 years old when I started like writing poetry. I was writing before that, but really writing poetry. I was about 12 years old, and I came into it to write about my depression, which I didn't have the language for at the time. And I was trying to, you know, I was just, that's the only place I could have those conversations and feel like I was being heard and feel as though I was able to say those things without repercussions, without somebody saying I'm making it up, without somebody saying, you know, you're being too emotional, or you're too sensitive, or you're too this, or you're too that. I could just come to the page and say whatever I needed to be said. And also what poetry allowed me to do was like say it in such a way where if somebody read it, they may or may not know what I'm talking about, just right off the bat. Not to say those poems were good, but you know, that was what I came to poetry for. And with all of these transitions in my life, I am not using poetry just for that space anymore. I mean, that was happening, you know, well before the pandemic, but I have been working on projects, and I have been writing poems and entering different parts of myself and different parts of the craft that are new. So maybe my answer is just like who I am as an artist is I'm just perpetually a student, trying to figure it out, trying to continue to tell the stories that will not leave me alone, but also tell the stories that I feel deserve a place in the world, and that are constantly in conversation with other poets who are Black and who are femme and who are queer. I think that, you know, it's really important that our stories be archived and shared and told. And so I think I am a student. I think I am somewhat of an archivist, you know, that one. Somebody who archives things. See, somewhat, because I don't even know how to pronounce it. And, you know, I think I am also starting to fall into like a category of like a dreamer. I'm getting more into not just retelling stories, but creating new stories. And that's something that's new in my work. Like I said, I came into poetry to document emotion, to document experience. And things have kind of taken a turn where I'm starting to craft just completely new stories. So yeah, maybe that's who I am. Ask me tomorrow and I might even tell you I'm not an artist. So here we are.
And isn't that such an artist / writer thing to say? Like, And once again, that's why I love poets. That's why I love artists, because you ask the artist, like, who are you as an artist? And it's like, what even is an artist when you really think about it? But I think within your answer that people will get a lot of what you're aiming to do as an artist, which I think is just as important as whatever labels, definitions we want to put on ourselves as artists. And I think that you touched a lot on like identity and how identities show up in the work that you're doing and the stories that you're hoping to amplify. But I love that you talked about this concept of being a dreamer. And I'm wondering if there's something in the water or something, because I too feel like I've made that transition from like, let me just craft a world out of this motherfucker. Like, let me like really start thinking and daydreaming and researching and really trying to figure out like, what is this utopia I can build out of poetry? And I think that's part of what's fueled me wanting to practice doing things like screenwriting, because it's like creating this world narratively, building out these characters, thinking about like what type of poem would this character write if they were writing a poem. And just, yeah, I love the concept of being a dreamer, because I think that's just so powerful, especially just given what we've already talked about with how the world is and how much life is beating us up. Like, why not give us the power, give us the permission, give us the space to dream up like what we envision?
Yeah. And I definitely encourage you to embark on screenwriting or like
continue. Oh, I already started the script.
Yes, do it. I think I have so many ideas for like movies and stuff, but the screenwriting format is just so,
it's a lot.
It's like, so I have been starting to dabble in prose, and I'm thinking about writing a novel, maybe, sort of, kind of, maybe. And I was talking to my partner, and she was like, write it. And I was like, okay, you don't understand. Like, you don't just sit down and just write a novel. And I'm also like, the thing about poetry, which I feel like, which I'll circle back. So the thing about poetry is you make your own rules. You just make your own rules. Do you want to use sentences? Do you want to use phrases? Do you want to use words? Do you just want to use like parts of words and not even, I'm like, I haven't written a sentence in years. So now I'm like, I got a novel idea, and I'm like, well, how do you write dialogue? Like, what's going on? This is weird. I have to use punctuation. I hate using punctuation. And what stresses me about the screenwriting format is that it is so structured. It's interior this, and then it's like setting, and then it's dialogue, and then it's this. But what I do think in terms of like the writing, the dialogue part, is you can write how people speak. And so that seems like the easier part in comparison to writing something that's prose, because while you can still write the way that people speak, you still have to do all of this other stuff, whereas like you could write a conversation between me and you, and it's just like however we talk, and it doesn't have to be so. Because the thing about screenwriting is you have that other element, or you intend to have that other element, where it's like the story is being told through the dialogue and also what's happening on the screen. Whereas when you have a book, it's like, okay, you have to tell everything in writing. So kudos to you for screenwriting. Shout out to us to branching out into other mediums, and also writing is hard.
Yeah, writing is hard, but man, it is such a good feeling when I feel like you're able to put into words what you were thinking about, like when you finish that poem that actually encompasses like, oh yeah, this is how I'm feeling. Because how you're feeling, I think that's what really bursts poets, when you start to really think about how you're feeling, and you're like, yeah, like these one words it's not really gonna cut what this sadness feels like today. Or no, I'm much more happy than just saying I'm happy. Like there's so many different layers to it. And yeah, like I said, I just love talking to artists so much, because I just feel like there's so much synergy there when I'm in such an academic space so much, where everything's like formulaic, everything has a reason behind it. Nobody wants to ask why. Nobody wants to debate colors. Like, let's get into the nuance of life. I love that.
Absolutely.
Crown Ellen, Bay Area. a proud sponsor of the Banquet Hall podcast. Thanks for listening.
And so, as someone who writes poetry, also as someone who has performed poetry both competitively or just in general, do you have any favorite performances or things that stand out to you in terms of when you're actually sharing your poetry with other people in an audible way?
Like favorite performances of mine?
Yeah, favorite performances of yours, or just like what that experience has been like for you performing your poetry.
Yeah. It's been phenomenal. I love performing, and I as a child, I wanted to be a performer. Now, baby Tianna thought she was going to be a singer-songwriter. And, you know, the thing about it is, Tianna cannot sing, okay? That's not my ministry. And, I did a little stint in choir in 6th grade, and that was a cute time, but it's not for me. And then I also learned that songwriting is not just writing the lyrics. I mean, you could be like a lyricist, right? But songwriting is not just writing the lyrics. And I was like, oh, this is also not for me. This is not for me at all. But I always wanted to perform, and I also wanted to be a dancer when I was younger. I really wanted to do. I thought that I was going to be running around with Tommy the Clown. Genuinely, I
feel that.
Listen, the way that I played You Got Served until listen, I genuinely thought that I was just gonna be in these streets crumping. And then I found out about contemporary dance. So I thought I was gonna be crumping, I was gonna be doing hip hop, and then I was gonna be doing contemporary dance. Now, none of that has happened. And I think that the thing that always held true was that I just wanted to be performing in some way, shape, or form. And it wasn't until I got into college that I was afforded an opportunity to perform. And that's when I was like, oh, I really like this thing. And I want to continue doing this thing. And so my first time performing, well, the first time I wrote a performance poetry piece was for this theater troupe that I had gotten into. And there were different shows within the theater troupe, and mine was a show where we completely build the script ourselves, and we take it to schools in the Bay. And then we also came down here to LA, and we did our show for high school students, and then we talked about higher education. And the first time I wrote a piece for that script and performed it in front of everybody else on the cast, not even an audience, I literally started laughing and crying at the same time. And I'm just and my poem was about bullying and self-harm. And I'm literally laughing. And then I start sobbing. But I'm still reading this poem. And the directors are like, girl, you have a lot of work to do. And it was ridiculous. But once I was able to, kind of build my skills and get a little more comfortable and perform, I was I have never felt anything like this. Just being on the stage and feeling so just connected to my body in a different way, and really shocked at being able to perform in these ways. And I found my old computer, and me and my partner were going through it because she's in tech, and she was helping me with get some things off my computer or whatever. And she had found some of my old slam videos, and I was cringing. Oh my God. Oh my God. You know, like they talk about levels in your voice, right? I started every poem at a 10. Every single poem starts at a 10. You know, you don't have anywhere to go from 10. That is the cap. That is the cap. Oh, it's so embarrassing. I was just screaming. But I think for that time in my life, that was really important because I think I just needed to scream. I think I just actually really needed somewhere to go and yell and scream and be mad and rid my body of all that angst and rage and all of these things, and I had nowhere else to do it. And I think now I come to performing with very different intentions. I think I come to performing now not as like I need this release, but more so as you know, this is my artistic expression, and I am now trying to challenge myself to perform in ways that I haven't before, and to do things with my voice and body that I have been imagining in my head for years, but have been too scared to try. And I think now that I have made room in my body and I have released all that other stuff, I have more room for like experimentation. And then to also like bring other things in, to bring dance in, to bring collaboration in with like music artists and like things like that. So I'm very excited for the future of performing. And I think slam has really shaped my my experience with performing, and it has given me so much. And I think it has allowed me to like now project myself somewhere else and kind of move away from slam, because even though slam is very dynamic and you can do so many different things on that stage in 3 minutes, I've seen so many different performances and they're all so beautiful. And well, let me not say all, but so many are beautiful and so many are just so unexpected, and it's amazing what you can do in 3 minutes with your voice, body, and a microphone, like just nothing else. I want less restriction now, and I want to have a stage where I'm not being scored and I am able to like, if I take away the judges, what would I do? You know, what is it that I really want to do on this stage if I'm not competing? So I think that's where I'm leaning towards now in performance.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you talking about slam brought up a couple of memories and things for me. One, when it comes to what would I do if there weren't judges here, I think that's really powerful and impactful, because I've only done slam poetry one time. It was the San Diego Poetry Slam team versus anybody, so people could form teams and go up against the San Diego Poetry Slam team. And the team that I was on, we were practicing like right before the show, and me and my friend Ronnie, we had this poem. It was our Donald Trump poem. Doesn't every poet have a Donald Trump poem from this era? But we were rehearsing it, and there's a point in the poem where we named some of the Black people that we've lost to police brutality. And one of the people on the slam team, who's like a vet in the community and very well respected, we're saying our lines, and then he was like criticizing how we were saying it. It's like, oh, like when you say these names, like you better mean something. And I'm like, how do you know what this means for me, or like how I am taking in this? And I think that when we really look at performance as a very self-centered thing and what we want to achieve out of those performances, I think it unlocks a lot for us as poets. Then the other thing, and this is more of a very facetious thing, and like, I don't know what got into this white girl that went to this poetry slam tea, but I was at this poetry slam. One, it was the first poetry slam I've ever been to where not a single Black person was competing. It was mostly white people, which was concerning. And one of said white people, she goes up there and she does this poem, and she's doing it, and it's like, okay, this is a good, impactful poem, but like the people in the audience are eating it up. But she got to this one part of the piece where she's like, oh, why you don't want me, man? Like, I'm gonna marry me a nice girl without him. I'm gonna be this, like, I was like, this is Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. She reenacted the last scene of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air when his dad leaves in that episode.
Oh,
And
wow.
because this was a predominantly white audience, the audience was eating it up. But me and this other dude that was at the open mic was like, this is Fresh Prince. I know she didn't just steal Fresh Prince of Bel-Air lines for this slam piece.
They be stealing. I mean, they have a long history of stealing.
Yeah, send the DNA.
Yeah, listen, that's so ridiculous. And also knowing your audience and knowing that your audience would probably not know that. Also hearing this story is really funny because I guess I never really thought about it, but it didn't occur to me that white people didn't watch Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I kind of thought everybody watched it.
That's for another day. Because how do you not watch Fresh Prince of Bel-Air?
I know that there's like a lot of, Black sitcoms where it's like, oh, I know white people didn't watch this. But I kind of just, if you would have asked me, I kind of would have been like, everybody watches Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And today I learned that that's not true.
Hey, you learn something new every day. But before we exit Poetry Corner, I just wanted to have one more poetry related question for now. Some shit might come up in 5 seconds, but you've been blessed to have some of your pieces featured in different magazines and showcased in different ways. What has it meant for you to have your work affirmed in that way, to where somebody's featuring it or somebody's publishing it for you?
It means a few different things, and it's kind of challenging. I think one thing it has meant is money sometimes, and not a great deal because, listen, poets do not be getting paid. They do not pay a lot for poetry, but I have gotten paid from some publications and things like that, and that has been very exciting for me to put my work into the world and to get paid. While it's not a new thing for me, it is always exciting to get paid for my work because the opportunities are few and fewer, it seems like, for me at least, since the pandemic has happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was living in Oakland, I was performing a lot, and a lot of the performances were paid, and I was featuring a lot. And now I'm in a new city, and I am not as connected to as many artists or as many artists who are working in venues and things like that. And so it's very nice to get paid to have my work out there. And it's also weird, right? It's the equivalent of, not necessarily the equivalent, because, a music artist can go and upload their own songs to Spotify and all of the things, right? But it's kind of like putting out a single and you're building an audience, right? So I would like to release books into the world, and
we would like you to also.
Thank you. Some advice that I had got, because I think I published my first piece in 2018 or 2019 maybe, and I don't have a lot of my work published online. And I was talking to a poet who reached out to me and was like, if you have any questions, if you need anything, like, let me know. And I reached out to him and I was like, well, what are your thoughts on publishing? Because it's kind of elitist, kind of not, depending on the publication, depending on the organization who's soliciting and all of the things, right? And it's like a game. And I was asking what their thoughts were on it, because it's hard. It's hard. And I at first had no idea what I was doing. And he was just telling me, like, think of it as like building your audience. If you want to put a book out, you put these poems out so people will learn who you are, they'll like your work, they'll follow your work. And then once you put a book out, you already have people who are going to buy the book, right? And so a lot of it has meant has just been strategy, kind of, and that's kind of weird to say. But it's this building. It's this building of an audience, building of a name, and then so money, building an audience, and it's always been about sharing my work with people. I, again, come from slam, and I have, what my biggest takeaway from slam is that I work so much better. I write so much better. I everything is so much better when I have people. Like, I have people to share my work with, to read with, to workshop with, to do all that with, and to, come away with a finished piece that I'm so excited about and wanting to share that with people. It's always been about sharing my work. And so yeah, those three things. And it's complicated because, the literary industry is an industry just like every other industry, and it's really challenging to navigate sometimes. And, I want to make sure that I'm not always sacrificing my morals, right? I think as we live under capitalism, sometimes you just have to. I want to make sure I'm not always sacrificing. And while for some people publishing is not that deep, I know that this is a very exclusionary practice. And I know that there are a lot of people who should be published that aren't. And I know that I got a poem in Poetry Magazine, which is amazing. And Poetry Magazine is the magazine, right? And to be fair, it really helped that last year I was a finalist for the Ruth Lilly Fellowship, which is a really, really prestigious fellowship. But now, when I applied last year, I was like, yeah, your girl not getting it. This is it was my second time applying for it. And I was like, I'm not getting it. I'm just applying because why not? Why not apply? And when I learned that I was a finalist, my mind was blown because I had also forgot that I applied for it. You apply in April. I think they tell you about it in the end of August. You're not thinking about that anymore. And I was a finalist, and I didn't end up getting it, but that is what allowed me to publish to poetry, right? So it's not and that's not to say I didn't deserve the fellowship, right? Like I said, I haven't published a lot. I wasn't in an MFA program at the time. I didn't have a lot of connections. I didn't know anybody who was, you're not supposed to know anybody who's reviewing the application, but I didn't know anybody. And so, but it was because of that I was able to be published on poetry, when I know people who have been sending their poems into poetry for years and haven't gotten, right, and deserve it. And so it's a tricky game. And I think it's really important, if you are going down the road of publishing, you are asking yourself why and what do you want from it. And it's also a hard game too, because it's you have to go through so many no's to get a yes, right? It's a probability game. And so that's a whole nother podcast in itself. But that's a little nutshell of my thoughts around publishing and my experience with it.
All I heard was that you're about to be a return guest to the podcast is what I took away from that last bit.
I would love to.
Hey, you're always welcome on the banquet hall. But let's go ahead and get out of Poetry Corner for a bit and give people kind of a sneak peek into other parts of your life. We don't have to go as far in depth, but just so people get to know more about you holistically, because I think one of the coolest things that I get out of this podcast is touching on the main point, maybe someone's a rapper, I invite them on the podcast, but I want to hear like what are the things that also like get you excited, things that you're interested in, and other things that you're doing, because one, that also shows up in the work you do, your other interests outside of poetry, but also it's just cool to get to know different things that make up you as a holistic person. So going to go through a few of these and then we'll get to the tail end of the podcast. First things first, wanted to talk about doula services. As I was browsing through tiannabrasher.com, what a great website. I saw that one of the things that you provide are like doula services. So one, I wanted you to just give us a few words on what is a doula, because I think some of our listeners might not be familiar with what doulas are, what services doulas provide, but also why it is important for you to provide doula services.
Yeah, absolutely. So a doula, specifically a birth doula, is somebody who supports birthing people throughout their pregnancy or postpartum or even, prenatal. But it is typically like somebody is pregnant and they reach out to a doula. The doula is there to, help answer any questions, help prepare not only the birthing person, but, whoever will be involved with the birth and, whoever the birthing team is, right? Which is typically, ideally it would be the birthing person and, the other parent or parents, any of their parents or, any siblings who are, or any best friends who want to help support the baby coming into the world. And so that support can look like, just answering questions, about health and safety practices, like what to do, what not to do while you're pregnant, what to expect, help creating a birth plan. Postpartum care could look like, coming over there and doing some meal prep, or, possibly helping out around the house. It just depends. Each doula is a little different. And then each birthing person is different. And then more often than not, it also includes being present for the birth, and to make sure that the birthing person is safe and respected in their decisions while they are in active labor. And so making sure that, if I was the doula for, say Brittany, that's the first thing that came to my head. Brittany's in active labor and we're in the room and the doctors are asking her all these questions. And I'm like, look, doc, she can't answer all these questions because she's literally trying to bring a baby into the world. I have spoken with her. I know she wants this thing. I know she wants that thing. Or like, I actually don't like the way that you're speaking to her. We need to make this environment as soothing and as relaxing as possible, and just making sure that that the birthing person and the baby are always being prioritized. And I believe you asked why someone should have a doula.
Or why is it important for you to provide those services?
Oh,
why is this important to you?
Yes. Well, funny enough, I'm actually not providing those services right now. Thank you for pointing that out. I have to update my website. But when I was on my journey to being a doula, it felt very important to me because similarly, when how I was talking about earlier about stories and Black queer folks like deserving their stories being told, I think it's really important that Black, queer, and trans folks are supported during pregnancy and birth, and also Black folks at large, because the way that we deal with birth in this country is so in opposition to how our bodies actually want to navigate birth, right? And I always tell people, laying on your back is actively working against gravity. Why would you try to push something into the world? And not to get too graphic, but I mean, when you go to the bathroom, you're not laying on your back, right? You're sitting, you're squatting.
Yeah.
Which is a very normal, natural way to actually push something or someone from your body, right? And so I think it's really important. It was really important for me to provide doula services because I really want Black folks, Black, queer, and trans folks to know all of their options, and then to also be supported in the room, because so many people die during childbirth. So many things go wrong during childbirth. There's so many complications that could be avoided. Like, so many of these things could be avoided. And oftentimes it's because of like the medical interference, right? And everything is really trying to make it easier for the doctor and the nursing staff and everybody who's in the hospital, where it's like, I would really like to make the birthing person a priority here. And if they want to give birth while squatting or laying on their stomach, or, you know, however they want to give birth, because that's what feels more comfortable to them, then that's what I want to do. And I don't know why I said laying on your stomach, because it's really probably not happening. But I don't know anybody who's doing it. But yeah, that was a driving factor for me in pursuing that. And while I'm not pursuing it right now, I do want to return to it in the future, when I am in a better position to do so, because I still believe that we deserve to have safe births, and also that we deserve options. You know, there are so many different ways to go about birthing, and also every single body is different. Everybody's pain is different. Everybody's comfortability is different. Everybody's baby is different. And you know, I think we need to honor that, and really, you know, having a doula is having somebody come in and honor, like, hey, I see you as a person with choice, and I see you as a person who has like specific needs and specific desires, and I'm going to do my best in order to meet all of those things, so you can deliver this baby as comfortably and safely as, you know, your body will allow you to.
I really appreciate, I mean, I've said this like 7 times this podcast, but I appreciate the depth in how you explain that, because even if you're not actively performing the doula services, I do think it is a service to even explain what a doula is, bring awareness to that, because I know that there are people who this might be their first time hearing about doulas. And I know doulas is something that I was introduced to probably like my last year of college, or right after my last year, because one of my friends is also preparing to become a doula. So I think the more that we are able to raise awareness about the need, some of the issues that marginalized folks face when it comes to birthing, and like you said, all the different bodies, all the different folks that are part of this process. So no, thank you for that explanation. And yeah, just thank you for servicing people in that way. I think that's very important. So in your bio on your website, the last sentence says, Tianna is a big sister and aspiring movie critic who is infatuated with vampire media, the lives of trees, and collage making. And honestly, I love that sentence to end your bio. So I wanted to make sure that I hit each one of those points. We talked about family a little bit earlier, but what about being a movie critic interests you?
Oh man, I love movies. I always have. And it could be a bad movie, it could be a good movie. And I will just want to sit through it for the story. And I think that the storytelling through the visual is something that I'm so intrigued by. And I also like to kind of try to figure the movie out before the movie gets to figuring itself out. And it just feels like a puzzle to me sometimes. And I think some of my favorite movies are movies that I didn't figure out before it got to me, you know, and I'm like, oh, you got me, you know. So I used to say I wanted to be a movie critic as a joke. And then I'm kind of like, oh no, maybe I'm serious, because I really like to also analyze film. And I really like to kind of dissect it, and like, you know, this worked and this didn't, and I wish they would have did this, and all of the things. And I just am so infatuated by the way that movies are made. And now I'm thinking often about like the decisions. I'm like, well, why did they choose to shoot it from here instead of over here, and why did they, you know, choose to use this setting and all of these things, because, you know, everything, well, maybe not everything is intentional, but everything when you put it on the screen plays a part of the story. And it's really fascinating, and I really, really like to dive deep into analyzing them, and I'm like, oh, I could be a little movie critic, even if it's just like, you know, for me and my friends instead of like
Hey,
or something like that. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, and I can spend a whole day literally doing you know, running the movies back to back to back to back to back. I love it. I love it.
see, we're gonna be friends. Not that we weren't already, but just because same, like lately, just the way I'm watching movies, I'm always like, ooh, why'd they do this? Or what does this say about this character? Or like, ooh, why is the camera focus here? So listeners, leave it in the comments, hit us up if you want Tianna and I to have a movie critic corner on the podcast, because I think that would be dope. We just, me, you, Lisa, like get together on a podcast every now and then and just critique a movie. Like, I think we can run some numbers with that.
Absolutely. That would be very cute.
Yeah, because I'm just such a proponent of things that we're passionate about becoming, aspiring to be, make it happen in whatever capacity you did. Like whether you're at every red carpet premiere being a movie critic, or if it's just like you said, you and the homies just critiquing movies. I think it's so fun and there's so much to that. So yeah, when I read that in your bio, I was like, huh, that's something I didn't know about you. And I'm so excited because I feel like there's synergy there. And yeah, whether it's screenplays, cinematography, it's just all so wonderful to me. I'm excited. Next up, vampire media. Just, I think that's the question. Just where did that start?
I'm pretty sure it started with Twilight.
Team Edward or Team Jacob?
Neither. They're both terrible monsters. Neither. And I'm not Team Bella either. I actually hate just about every
ask.
I hate just about every character in that story, but it's so nostalgic for me because Twilight those were the first like 400-page books I've ever read. I didn't read Harry Potter, I skipped that, and so like these were the longest books I had ever read at that time in my life, and my mom and I read them together. And then the movies came out, and I don't know if we saw all of them together, but we definitely saw the first two together. And it was something that we had like really bonded over, and we had read some other books and stories together too. My mom is really into fantasy, and so a lot of the reading was like vampires or like, you know, some kind of like immortal being, fantastical being, whatever. And so that's where it started. And somewhere down the line, I think I watched, it was True Blood. I watched True Blood. I didn't watch the whole, or maybe I did. I don't know. I watched True Blood, I think, in high school. And then I watched Vampire Diaries in probably like 2018, 2019. And then I watched True Blood again. And then I just started to watch all of them. And then I just had developed an obsession. And the obsession is so deep now, it's made it into my writing. And it has more to do with like, I'm really interested in the idea of a vampire, this being that has once been human and is no longer human. And so understands humanity, understands human practice, understands human ways, right? Like, it's not like some like alien character who's like, I'm trying to adapt. It's like, you know what it means to be human. And you are completely something else now. And not only are you something else, but you also have like all of these like what someone might identify as powers, right? Like super hearing, super fast, some can fly, some can't, but like, you know, they can compel people, all of these things. And what really stresses me out about vampire media is that they're all almost revolving around romance. And I'm like, this is so fascinating because the opportunities or like the possibilities of a vampire are kind of endless. And we're always landing on romance. And not only are we always landing on romance, but like in like very popular TV shows and movies and media and stuff like that, it's usually a 200-year-old man vampire who falls in love with a 17-year-old high school student. And I'm like, we really have to move on from this. We really have to find somebody your age, or like, please get somebody in their 30s, you know, like,
Please.
you're 200, babe. And you're 200 years old. What do you find interesting about a 17-year-old? Like you lived in a time, like, I'm just like, you've seen the world change so much.
Mm-hmm.
You've gone from having no phone to now having an iPhone. You've gone from having to go get buckets of water to turning on the faucet. Like, I'm just like, what could really interest you in a 17-year-old who only cares about, you know, graduating high school and like trying to get into the best college? Like, I'm like, you have so much knowledge about the world. Like, what could y'all really, really talk about? You know what I mean? And not to dismiss 17-year-olds as if they are not smart, because kids are smart, okay? But it's just like, Tianna at 28 doesn't want to sit and talk to a 17-year-old all day. I don't because we don't have the same interests. We don't have the same interests. We don't have the same relationship to the world. And so it's just like, I'm really interested in the possibilities of a vampire and like what that could be and what it's not. And I really, really, really want stories that are of vampires that are not about romance. But I'm like, what if there were Black vampires, right? Do you know what would be accomplished? Like, you know,
talk about it.
I'm just like, yeah, it just feels like people use vampire stories and vampire lore to kind of like play out like these really grotesque fantasies and ideas of like what is frowned upon and what is unacceptable to do as a human. But if you're a monster, you get a pass, right? Like pedophilia. And it's just like, I really don't want to give it a pass to anybody. Right. Like, I really don't want to watch vampires falling in love with 17-year-olds anymore, or like ever. But like, y'all have done that. Let's move on to something else, and like really explore what this identity, like all that it can do. And I think I'm also interested in things that are like really polarized as like, this is only good or this is only evil. And I think that argument could be made for vampires as like, they're only evil. So of course they're going to be pedophilic, or they're going to be, you know, rapist, or they're going to be this. And I'm like, and what if they weren't? What else could they be? And how can we muddy this binary of good and bad? Like, why do they only have to be bad? And why do they also only have to be bad in this way and evil in this way? And what other evils could exist that are like, I don't know, I think about just like, you know, for instance, like Israel and Palestine right now is just like, there are so many people who are like, what Palestine is doing is terrible, terrible, terrible. If you are Israeli, you're like, that's evil. But if you're not, and you belong to a group of oppressed people, you know that Palestine and Palestinians, like, that evil is actually good. That evil is actually what is, you know, sustaining us. And so how can we like muddy this like good and evil narrative in a way that like will allow us to tell other stories? And like, what else, like, what could we destroy if we had vampires from different positionality, and if we were able to see the good in what somebody sees as evil.
I could tell that you're really in love with the vampire media thing though, because I feel like that, like I saw the light flicker when like you really started getting in your bag. I'm like, oh, you've thought about this. Like that's definitely obvious. Couple more things from the bio. We talked about trees a little bit, but if you can give us just kind of like what Tianna thinks the world needs to learn from trees. That's the question I want to ask you. I know that's a very loaded question, and we could probably talk about that for 3 hours, but what do you think that people need to learn from trees, or something you've learned from trees that you want to share with people?
Trees are so communal. In such beautiful, beautiful ways. The way that trees communicate with each other is fascinating. And I think I think a lot of organizers and a lot of educators, I think, do learn from trees. And I think we can continue to learn from them by replicating the ways that they take care of each other.
I love that.
If a tree is sick or has some kind of like infestation, it will send messages via the roots to other trees, and those trees will send nutrients to that tree. And they just like the way that they take care of each other and communicate is it's so beautiful. And trees are hubs, they're homes. Or like a tree is a living thing, and then so many things live in trees, right? So many insects, so many animals. And I'm just like, yeah, like how can we how can we be hubs, and how can we use all the resources that we have to support our loved ones in our community and our friends and the people neighboring us, right? How can I think about this often, because I had a friend who once was going on vacation for like the whole summer, and she hits this group chat with me and a few other friends in it, and she was like, hey, I'm going away for a few months. I know that a car is a resource. Do y'all without a car want to borrow my car for the summer?
That's love.
And it's so much love, right? So much love. And it was like, that was such an important framing for me, because then I got to use the car, and that was fantastic for me because I didn't have a car, and after that did not have a car when she came back. But it was, yeah, that was fantastic for me. But the framing of it was like, this is a resource. Like, this is a thing that I own, but it's a resource, right? I have washer and dryer. Like, that is a resource. Or like, I tell my partner, like, if you want to just come over here and do your laundry, you can, thinking about what we have to offer other people, even if it's seemingly so small, and even if it's something that like we own or like feel is intrinsically ours, it's like, how can we help, or how can we use that to help somebody else? That trees do that all the time, all year, even when trees are dead. And that's not to say like, when you're dead, you're dead. Don't be out here like, I mean, people use their bodies for science or whatever. So like, make flies. But like, when you're dead, you're dead. You don't really have to offer your body up, like, but even when trees die, they still house, they still feed the land. You know what I mean? I'm like, is that even really being dead? And I think that is such a, like, they're just so brilliant, and there's no words for how brilliant they are. They just exist, like, to just give and like also to flourish. Trees that have been around for like 400, 500 years that are just fucking huge, and just are like, I'm just here growing still my leaves fall off and then they come back and people still live in me and then they don't. And then, and it's just like, I'm still sending nutrients to other trees. It's just like, it's fucking brilliant. And I think we can learn so many communal practices from the ways that trees are in relationship to one another.
Listeners, if you're hearing this, go hug a tree. Like that's just what I want to do right now. I just want to go hug a tree right now. Tianna, it's been great just chatting with you, catching up, and seeing you light up about the things that you're passionate about that I feel like we don't always get the opportunity to talk about. Like I meant it when I said you're probably going to be a return guest on the podcast, because there's a bunch of questions that just in the last 5 minutes have come up. That like, damn, I just want to hear you talk about this for another like 45 minutes to an hour. But we are on a Monday evening. I want to make sure that respectful of both of our evenings and time. So I want to transition a bit to start wrapping up with a few quick hitter questions, things that I feel will help us round this full conversation out. First and foremost, who are some people who inspire you or influence you? You could just name one or two of your inspirations or influences, just to help us get an idea of who are some of the people that you, look to.
Absolutely. Some people that inspire me, I would say Courtney Faye Taylor. She's the author of Concentrate. I read that book at the top of the year, changed my life, changed my relationship to art. So definitely Courtney Faye Taylor. And to name another one who I'm thinking of people who are inspiring me right now, because the list is long and long and long. I would say somebody else who is inspiring me currently is a poet and essayist, I believe, Justin Philip Reed, who is the author of The Malevolent Volume and Indecency. Justin is very smart, is very, very smart, and talks about like monsters and things, and they're grotesque and as it relates to Blackness, and has some really incredible insight. And so, yeah, those two.
And then where can people find you / your work or support you and your work? How can people reach out to you?
Absolutely. So my website is back up and live. You can find my website at tiannabratcher.com. That's TIANNABRATCHER.com. And then my Instagram and my Twitter is tvampy. That's TVAMPYY.
Is that related to Vampire Media?
It is. It is actually.
I don't think I ever really thought about why your handle was that until I saw the Vampire Media thing. I was like, makes sense.
Yeah,
where do I want to go next? Let's go with, what are some takeaways from this episode? One, what do you hope our listeners are taking away from this episode? And then two, what are you taking away from our conversation today?
I hope our listeners take away the, importance of, it's funny because I've said community a lot on this podcast, but I don't actually like the word community, or like I don't like the way that it's often used. But for the sake of time, I would say, I think I want them to take away the importance of building and connecting and sustaining a community of folks, and like that being intentional, not just like, oh, you have a shared identity with somebody who you've never met before, so y'all are in community. I mean, people that you're actually like checking in on, making sure they be in, making sure they're enjoying themselves, going out into the sun with, making sure that they got what they need and who's checking on you and things like that. Like an active group of people that you can like flourish with, I think is so important. And I hope that the listeners take that away and, continue to pour into the people that they pour into and who pours into them. And something that I am taking away today is, how great you are, which I feel like is something that I take away from conversations often, but you are like first of all, this whole podcast, even beyond this episode, but the whole podcast at large is such a beautiful idea. And you are, I think when we talk about, right, pouring into those people who pour into us and in building community, I think that, you know, this is a part of that, right? Like you saying, I want to see the people that I know and I want to hear what they have to say, and like, you know, coming with these questions and the intention behind them, where like you're bringing in seemingly like a simple question of like, where are you from? It's like seemingly very simple, but the way that you have set up the space and allowed me to talk about that has provided me with even more clarity about my experience, right? It's given me a space to like share deeply about that. And that's really beautiful. And so I really appreciate that. And that is going to be my takeaway for today.
Well, I receive and appreciate and yeah, just thank you for the validation and affirmation. Thank you for your time as well. I think it's very easy to ask intentional questions and to give people that space when like your energy makes it easy. Like I said this before we started recording, but I was very much looking forward, one, just to see you, like I haven't seen you in a few months, two, just to like hear you. And I think your energy translates well via Zoom. So just nice to have those intentional conversations, because we live in a time where everything's a 3-second TikTok video and you don't really get to sit and really have these deep conversations. And honestly, if it wasn't evening and I didn't have things I'm doing, like we could have talked for another hour and a half about just all these different things. But it definitely was a pleasure to have this conversation. Looking forward to future conversations. Listeners, I always say this at the end of episodes and I always mean it. Y'all got 5-star content. I need the 5-star rating on the back end. Tianna gave y'all all types of gems, all types of stories, and this is only the beginning. Make sure y'all follow the podcast at Banquet Hall Pod. Leave us those reviews, leave those comments, hug those trees, check out the Vampire Media. And Tianna will be back on the Banquet Hall. We don't know when yet, but we will be back with Tianna because there's just so much more to you as a person that you can't really fit into a 2-hour podcast. But I tried my best and I think we got a lot out of that. So just thanking you once again for your time, for your intentionality. Looking forward to the book and whenever that comes out. And yeah, just thank you for being you, T. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you too.
Oh, what a wholesome way to close out a podcast.